For landlords, by landlords. The Rent Perfect Podcast with David Pickron.
Well, welcome to the Rent Perfect Podcast today. Mark Zinman here. Mark, how are you doing?
Good, thank you for having me.
Scott Aubrey on this side. We're coming to you a three-way today. Certainly grateful to be here and talk about fair housing. Is that an exciting topic?
I love fair housing.
Well,
I actually do, but
Yes,
I'm
yeah.
guessing I'm in the minority on this one.
Let me tell you a little bit about Mark. Mark's an amazing attorney here in Arizona. He's our go-to on everything. We just did a big project with him that we're going to kind of lay out a little bit today that's going to benefit you. So we're really excited to explain that. Mark, tell us about yourself just real quick.
Sure. Yeah, I'm an attorney here in Arizona with ZONA.LAW. I mean, obviously, disclaimer purposes. I'm an attorney. I like that. I'm only licensed here in Arizona. But you know, day-to-day stuff, this is what we do. Landlord-tenant, fair housing is a big part of our practice area as well.
And Mark is my personal attorney, but he's not your personal attorney. So anything we talk about today, if you're going to make any big changes, run it through your own attorney. And Scott, you know, our sidekick, Scotty, doing okay today?
Fantastic.
Do you go by sidekick? Is that?
I think that's my official term.
You know, it's probably degrading.
It's on my...
Is that, did I just violate fair housing? by
No,
any chance?
fair housing, you're fine. I just didn't know if you used the brains.
It's on my email signature line is David's sidekick. Yes.
Scott is the brains. You know, the guy who talks too much is probably the guy that doesn't even know what he's talking about. So, and that's me. But anyways, so we are here with just Mark and want to talk about a project. You know, we talked about this, 4 or 5 months ago, doing a 7-part fair housing series. It was not easy.
No, a lot of time, a lot of effort all around from the teams.
But important. And so, Mark, I'm going to let you explain what inspired us to do that. Do you remember what the Arizona Attorney General came out with?
Well, yeah, it's funny you say that, though. It was, I think you were actually ahead of the game with the idea, and then it came afterwards, right? So if people don't know, again, we're in Arizona. The Arizona Attorney General here has put out an entire marketing ad basically addressing fair housing and telling people if they believe that their rights have been violated, they should file a fair housing complaint with their office. But that's more recent. I think your idea, and I will give you full credit, is 4 or 5 months back, you're like, hey, I think we should get back to the nuts and bolts of fair housing because it's so complex and it permeates all of landlord-tenant relationships. Let's just break it down into a training video. And usually you're, dragging my feet forward. And so,
and let's make it free.
Yeah.
And let's make it convenient. And at the end, let's give them a little certificate that they can have if they ever, have a complaint filed on them or something saying, hey, I've taken fair housing. I've tried to educate myself. Right. And so, and this is available to you. And Mark, I think in 1 or 2 of those episodes, you might mention Arizona once or twice, maybe when it's source of income being Tempe and Phoenix. But other than that, this is a federal type of training that will really work for every state.
Yeah,
correct?
Absolutely. I mean, the only thing that really, as you mentioned, is the source of income. Other than that, the Fair Housing Act, we look at it from the federal perspective, right? Arizona matches the federal, and the federal is consistent across.
Right.
So we don't address like every different state as to what they may do, but the bigger picture of the Federal Fair Housing Act.
Well, Scott, you edited a lot of it and helped us with that project,
Yeah.
and you listened to a lot of it. And I know when I listened to it, now I've heard Mark give it many times live, but still every time I go through this training, I learn something or I think of something or maybe I'm in a different situation, and every time I'm coming up with questions or, oh my goodness, could I be violating that by doing this or whatever? So what did you see as you were going through
Well,
these
one of the
videos?
questions that just came up from an episode we recorded a couple weeks ago about renting by the room.
Okay, that's a hot topic,
right?
right?
That's a new thing. I mean, not a new thing, but really a new thing to the marketplace. And so, how is fair housing being interpreted in rent by the room situations? Let me just give you a scenario because this is one Dave and I were talking about. What if I've got an individual that's in that property renting a room that has special accommodations that are needed for, let's say, cabinet height.
That's in the common area.
That's in the common area, right? In the kitchen area, common area. But I've got another individual renting a room who's 6'11". How is this going to be interpreted, and what do we have to do as a housing provider in that kind of a situation?
So just to summarize, we have 2 competing people that need different things, and they're both coming at you for reasonable exceptions.
Yeah, and I like
accommodations.
Yeah, for the viewers, by the way, if you noticed, he picked like probably the hardest question we could start off.
Of course,
which is always nice to do to the attorney. I think if you break it down, so every fair housing issue, whether it's from assistance animals, any issue you start off with, is the person disabled, is always your first question under the Fair Housing Act. And obviously the person that you're saying needs the accommodation of lowering the cabinets is disabled.
Sure.
The other person you're talking about is not disabled. So you don't actually have competing issues. What you have is really a person that's disabled that needs the accommodation, or in this case, a modification to lower the cabinets. And for the other person, it's more of an inconvenience.
Okay.
So I think if I were to guess, the Attorney General and as well as HUD would look at that and say, you have to err on the side of the disabled person to protect their interest and their ability to live there. Because for them to use the cabinets at all, it has to be lowered. For the person that's 6'7", they can use taller cabinets, they can use lower cabinets.
Yeah.
It's just an annoyance. So I think in that case, you would have the issue that you err on the side of allowing the cabinets to be lowered, and then probably the person that's taller would just get out of their lease if they want to non-renew at the end of it. But I think they're still bound, and their rights aren't infracted enough that it makes a difference.
Would the same rules apply as far as paying for that accommodation and then putting it back once they were out of the property?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah. The resident is liable to pay for those, and they're on the hook. I think an interesting one, which would be even harder to figure out, though, that has not been settled, is if in that exact same scenario, is one person has an emotional support animal and the other person has an allergy to dogs.
Okay.
Because then you have two people with disabilities. And are you supposed to decide between the two?
Yeah.
Is there reasonable restrictions that you could put so that the person with the allergies is not impacted?
Yeah, and there's no hierarchy there, right? That says, well, this person's disability is better than this one, or
Correct. And
Yeah.
I mean, HUD's pretty clear. We're not supposed to pick between disabilities.
right. It's interesting in a room by room. I mean, if you're renting by the room as well, like, okay, I've got to come in and redo the kitchen area. Well, that's going to affect the other tenants that are in those rooms, right? It's not like it's an empty property, so. There's all sorts of things to kind of figure out.
I think and as you guys said, it's new to the market in terms of it's becoming
Right.
more organized. Another thing from fair housing that would interesting there is gender identity, and sexual orientation is not as relevant really, but the gender identity is if it's by bedrooms, if women only want to be with women, is that really something you can do? Because then if somebody how they define themselves creates issues.
Yeah, because if you're sharing a bathroom and so.
Yeah, very complex.
One thing about rent by the room is usually they assign part of the refrigerator or this cabinet is yours or whatever. So you could lower the one cabinet for the one person that's assigned his cabinet and then keep all the other cabinets up. Since they don't have access to the whole kitchen like you would if you rented to the whole house to them,
Yeah.
I think you could attempt. Does that sound good if I called you with that solution?
Yeah, I mean, if they actually have theirs versus, people separate,
Okay.
each person gets a cabinet,
Interesting, yeah.
then that would be a reasonable way of addressing it.
Okay, so you're not going to give us any kind of insight on an allergy in one room and an emotional support animal in another room, and they called you and how to deal with it.
No, I think there are cases. I think I'd have to go back and research how HUD handled it. I think the restriction is you allow the animal, and I think if I remember, you try and restrict where the animal can go, but you're splitting fine hairs
Oh
at
my
that point.
gosh, yeah.
It's above my pay grade.
And you're just hoping one person says, "Okay, I'm out
out."
of here,"
Yeah.
and you would be happy to let them go. So I'm gonna show my stripes here a little bit, get a little bit vulnerable. One of my pet peeves is I show a house, I get an application, we're ready to go, ready to move them in, and here comes Fido with them, and I say, "Well, wait a minute. We never talked about a dog. Oh, it's an emotional support animal." I know what you're going to say, okay? But I want to hear it again.
But you don't want me to say it.
Because every single time that really bothers me. Now, if you're up front with it and, hey, this is what we've got, and okay, let me have your doctor's name, and I can go. But at the very last minute, I really feel like they just don't want to pay the pet rent. They don't want to pay the pet deposit. So tell me again.
Did they bring the pet when they looked at the property?
No. It's
Okay,
the first time
yeah.
I've ever seen the
Okay,
pet is when
okay.
I'm handing him the keys. So tell me what you've told me before, and I don't want to hear it, but what do I need to do?
Yeah, until HUD changes the rules for emotional support animals. First off, there's going to be a ton of abuses of it, but you can't really assume that there's an abuse. So literally, you have to treat it as a valid emotional support animal. And so it's the same as a wheelchair. So if you basically gave me that same exact scenario, person shows up, they applied online, they go to sign, I guess, the day of, and they show up in a wheelchair. Are you going to treat them differently because they're in a wheelchair? Absolutely not. You say, hey, you're qualified to rent here, we're happy to go. And that's the same thing with an emotional support animal is you brought your emotional support animal. Do we have the documentation we need? Yes? Okay, you've got it. And even if you believe, maybe it's in the back of your head, that it's not valid for some reason, under the law, if they have the documentation, then you have to accept it.
Okay, so for all my friends out there that feel like I do, you've just heard what he said. We need to get over that. We need to just say, hey, we should expect every time we hand the keys over to someone for a surprise, and we need to handle it gracefully and just say, you know what? We're going to get in a lot of trouble if we just don't follow fair housing. And so thank you for telling them and telling me again. You'll probably have to tell me that again.
Yeah, to keep you out of trouble.
It's hard for me to.
Does every fair housing question start, but what if? Because it seems like every question regarding is well, I know, but what if blank, right? It's so open to I think people's own interpretation, but there's a very specific application of the law.
Yeah, I love that because you would be surprised how many clients I've told, I am more than happy for you to pay me to play the what if game.
Yeah.
And I will sit on the phone as long as you want to have that, but it's the what if game.
Yeah.
And then the flip side of that is too, clients are like, well, how does that work under fair housing? How is that allowed? I believe this is an abuse. I'm like, if you want to pay for me to litigate the case and you're okay with losing, there's tons of cases I'd be more than happy to litigate. But the client has to understand the risk. Right. And if it's coming over you allowing a dog in your house, it may not be worth that risk.
Yeah. Makes sense.
Okay, one of the things that I really liked too is in this training, and you've got to go to this training, and we're gonna give you the link here in a little bit. But I love how you separate fair housing versus ADA. I think we cross over that a lot, and we kind of get it confused, and we don't fully understand the difference between the two. Can you just give me a high-level difference between the two, and then they can go watch the training and get the really good finite stuff?
Absolutely, yeah. And that part, I was really happy with that part of the training video because I think a lot of people don't understand that there's differences. And a lot of time when tenants make complaints, they always cite to the ADA. Especially in the single-family world, the ADA will almost never apply. The ADA governs public accommodations. So think about restaurants, bars, theaters, places that people go out at night. They can walk in, they're fine. Legally, they can do that. Well, that may exist in an apartment community, like an office. But in a single-family home, there's nothing public about it. You don't want John Doe off the street walking in the front door. They have no right to be there. So for your single family, there is nothing ADA. It is just the Fair Housing Act. And so it's good for them to understand the distinction because also with the different laws, different obligations come up as well. And I think we did a good job with that training of really addressing all those nuances and getting people to understand. Because for me, and this is really, and I give you a lot of credit in terms of the class, it's not, the entire series, it's not about just teaching and someone is supposed to absorb it. The whole idea, I think how we did it was really to get people to understand the concept.
Mm-hmm. Right.
That was a big thing for, I think, how we developed it.
Right. Yeah, I'm pretty happy with it.
Yeah, no, it's a great resource. I've been in real estate for almost 30 years, and these are sticking points for me that I always go back to and go, okay. And so you got so much clarity to so many different topics for me just through that training. So thank you.
Thank you very much.
Well, even in the first training module, which I love, it lays out how our founding fathers and in what years they made certain laws and how did we get where we're at. And we went through the civil rights and then women couldn't vote. And then it was actually a history lesson for me, which sometimes we sit here today and go, well, how did we get here?
Yeah.
And Mark, you did such a great, way of teaching, why everything happened in what order and put us in the position today. And it helps me instead of saying, I had the problem with the dogs, but it helps me to say, oh, okay, I see why there's this protection, and I see why there's this protection, and I actually don't hate fair housing. I actually think a lot of it is relevant. It's the people who take it, further than what it was meant to be. But it actually calmed me down a little bit when it talks about fair housing. As long as you know it, and you understand the why, that's just it. I think we don't understand the why. We're always hearing, I got sued, I got a complaint. We don't understand the why of it. And I love the very beginning just talks about this is the why.
Yeah.
And so it calms a feisty personality like mine, it calms me down a little bit and says logically, okay.
Yeah. And our next generation of investors, which is this younger group, they want to understand the why, right? They don't want to do anything unless they fully understand the why. So I think this is a great, again, another great education piece for them to peace of mind go, oh, okay, that's why.
Right.
So.
And one last question, real simple. We started with the hard one. Let's close this with a real easy one. Number one reason for fair housing complaints. What's the number one?
Disability by far. It's not even close to the other six protected classes.
Okay.
Yeah.
And why do you think that is? Isn't disability, though, we can really see it? It's pretty obvious that someone has a disability, or are there disabilities now that we're having a hard time picking up in everyday interaction with people?
Oh, yeah, there's definitely, not all disabilities are obvious, no question about that. And there's different laws depending on whether it's an obvious disability, like I'm in a wheelchair, versus multiple chemical sensitivity that you can't see.
So physical, mental, and,
Exactly.
Perfect.
And there's even physical ones, though, that you can't see. I mean, if somebody, for example, has cancer, it impacts their daily life. They clearly are disabled from a legal standpoint, but you may not be able to know that.
Okay. Perfect. And this teaches you what you can ask, what you can't ask, what you should do, and it just helps you, navigate that part of it so you can be a better property owner, a better property manager, and probably find the best tenants if we just go ahead and give them what they need to thrive and survive, and they probably will be with you for years. So fair housing, actually, if you understand it, probably make you guys a lot of money finding the right people. I appreciate it, Mark. Thank you so much. So LMS.ZONA.LAW. Okay, LMS.ZONA.LAW. Thank you. Going to take you right to this module.
We'll link it in the description. That way they can just click the button.
Right. Watch number 1, 2, 3, 4. Go as far as you want. When you are done with that, you will get a certificate that prints out saying you have done fair housing. Do you care who gets on there? The whole world needs to take this.
No, I mean, from my perspective, it's just training. So I think I welcome anybody to watch the video. It's literally just to get you to understand the issues more.
Right.
Yeah.
Don't have to be in Arizona. Don't have to have property in Arizona where we're at. You can have it nationwide, and I really think you'll benefit from it. I'd love you to watch it and then comment if you're watching this on YouTube or anywhere that you can make comments. We'd love to hear it, and we want to really thank Mark. He did a great job with this training, and we're actually excited to send this out to all of our clients to say this is really beneficial for you to take part of, and it might inspire us to do some more training on something else here in the future. So.
Oh, I definitely think there'll be more to come. There's no question about that. But yeah, I mean, similar to what you're talking about, I'd always be amazed if somebody would comment. If you watch and make it through the first fair housing training, just the history one you're talking about, and you don't learn something, just comment, because that deserves some sort of award right there.
A lot of research on that one. Huh?
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, we thank you for joining us today, and until next time, continue to rent perfect.